Your support keeps these stories alive. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell.
My name is Daniel. I am 32 years old, and I never thought my family would fall apart over money, let alone over something as supposed to be sacred as inheritance. When my father passed away, he left behind not just memories, not just his wisdom and quiet strength, but also a modest inheritance that was meant to give me and my sister a financial cushion for our futures. It wasn't an empire, it wasn't millions, but it was something real, something earned through decades of long days and calloused hands. My father worked 30 years at a manufacturing plant, rising before dawn, returning long after the sun went down, and all he wanted was to make sure his children didn't struggle the way he did. The total inheritance amounted to about $50,000 split evenly, 25,000 for me and 25,000 for my sister. On paper, it seemed simple. Two siblings, each receiving their share, no drama. But anyone who's lived through family matters knows that money has a strange way of revealing people's true faces. My sister, Jessica, had always been the golden child in my mother's eyes. Growing up, I was the one told to wait, sacrifice, understand, while Jessica's whims were treated like urgent emergencies. If she wanted dance lessons, my parents found a way. If she wanted a new phone, my father picked up overtime shifts. Meanwhile, when I asked for something simple like money for a college trip, the answer was often, "We can't afford it, Daniel. Maybe next year." I don't say this to sound bitter, but to give you context. The ground had always been uneven between us. When the lawyer read the will, I felt something close to relief. For once, fairness. For once, balance. $25,000 each, no strings attached. I remember sitting there, looking at Jessica, who wore this polite little smile that I knew all too well. To anyone else, it might have looked like gratitude, but to me, it was the mask she wore whenever she was already plotting. I tried to shake off the paranoia. Maybe I was just projecting old resentments. But weeks later, I would find out that my gut instinct was right all along. At first, everything seemed fine. We both had access to the account where the inheritance was temporarily held before distribution. I hadn't touched a cent of mine. I wanted to be cautious, maybe put it toward a down payment on a house, or use it to finally pay off some of my student loans. Meanwhile, Jessica was planning her wedding. She and her fiancé, Mark, had been engaged for about a year. Mark is... how do I put this politely? He's a guy who always talks bigger than his wallet, the kind who'll lease a brand new car he can't afford, just to look good on Instagram. When Jessica got engaged to him, I congratulated her, but deep inside, I knew she was stepping into a partnership built on appearances more than substance. Their wedding was scheduled for the fall, and Jessica would not stop talking about it. "It's going to be the event of the year," she told anyone who would listen. "I don't care what it costs. It has to be perfect." I remember rolling my eyes privately. Who spends tens of thousands on one day when you could be securing your financial future? But that was Jessica. Everything had to be grand, had to outshine, had to impress. One Saturday afternoon, about 2 months before the wedding, I logged into the inheritance account just to check on it. I nearly dropped my phone when I saw the balance. Instead of my 25,000 sitting safely there, it showed only a few $100s left. I refreshed the page, thinking maybe it was an error. But no, the money was gone. My heart pounded in my chest. I scrolled through the transaction history, and that's when the truth slapped me across the face. Multiple withdrawals, transfers made to a joint account with Jessica's name on it. $25,000 my share vanished, funneled into what I could only assume was her wedding fund. I felt rage like I'd never known before. My hands trembled. It wasn't just the money, it was the betrayal. That was my father's legacy to me. Something he worked for, something he wanted me to have, and she had stolen it. Not borrowed, not asked. Stolen. The worst part was that my mother already knew. When I confronted her, she sighed heavily and said, "Daniel, try to understand. Your sister's wedding is important. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. You're single, you don't need the money right now. She promised she'll pay you back when things settle down. I couldn't believe my ears. My mother, the woman who raised me, was defending theft. I shouted louder than I ever had in her house. This isn't about needing it right now. It's about respect, about Dad's legacy. He didn't sweat for 30 years so Jessica could blow my share on flowers and a fancy dress. My mother cried, saying I was being cruel, that family should help each other. But what she meant was, family should help Jessica, and Daniel should just swallow the loss. That night, I barely slept. My mind was on fire. How could my own blood treat me this way? Should I let it slide to keep the peace, or should I stand up for myself? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that silence would mean surrender, and surrender would mean disrespecting not only myself, but also my father's memory. So I decided I was going to expose the truth. If my mother wanted to sweep it under the rug, fine, but the rest of the family would know what Jessica had done. I began collecting proof screenshots of the bank account, copies of the transaction records, even the email notifications. Piece by piece, I built a case. I didn't care if it caused a scene at her wedding. If she wanted her dream day built on stolen money, then the dream was going to come crashing down in front of everyone. And that, right there, was the spark that set everything in motion. The morning after I discovered my sister had drained the account, I woke up with a knot in my chest. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and angrier than I had ever been in my life. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my dad's face, his tired smile after long shifts, the way he used to tell me, "Daniel, you're the strong one. You'll make it on your own." He trusted me to be responsible, and I had been. I didn't waste a single dollar, didn't touch the inheritance, because I wanted to honor his work. And here was Jessica, stealing not just my money, but his legacy. I knew then that confronting her wasn't optional anymore. It was inevitable. I decided to call her first, to at least give her the chance to explain herself before I tore her perfect little fairy tale apart. She picked up on the third ring, her voice sugary sweet, as if she already knew I'd discovered her little secret. "Danny, what's up?" she chirped, like nothing had happened. My jaw clenched. "Don't call me Danny," I snapped. "Where's my money, Jess?" There was silence for a few seconds, then a sigh. "Daniel, listen, it's temporary. I just needed it for the wedding. You'll get it back after. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" A big deal? $25,000 was not pocket change. "You stole it!" I shouted into the phone. "That money was half mine. It wasn't a loan, it wasn't yours to touch. You didn't even ask me. You just helped yourself." Her voice hardened. "Daniel, stop being dramatic. We're family. What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine. You're single, you don't have responsibilities. This wedding is important for me, for Mom, for everyone. Dad would have wanted me to be happy." That line made my blood boil. How dare she drag Dad into this? Don't you dare use Dad as your excuse. He didn't bust his back for 30 years so you could blow my inheritance on a damn party. My voice was shaking with rage now. "You crossed a line, Jessica. You don't steal from family." She laughed, then a cold, mocking laugh that cut straight through me. "Oh, please, Daniel. You've always acted like the victim. Maybe this is life's way of balancing things out. Get over it." Then she hung up. I stood there holding the phone, my heart pounding in my chest, my ears ringing. She didn't regret it. She wasn't sorry. She felt entitled to my share, like I was just supposed to roll over and accept it because that's what I'd done my whole life. But this time, no. Not this time. That weekend, I went to my mother's house. I didn't even bother with small talk. I walked straight into the living room, dropped a stack of printed bank statements on the coffee table, and said, "Explain this." My mother looked uncomfortable, wringing her hands. "Daniel, we already talked about this. Your sister—" "No," I interrupted, slamming my fist on the table so hard the lamp rattled. "We didn't talk. You made excuses. This is theft, Mom. I want my money back, and if Jessica doesn't return it, I'm going to make sure every single member of this family knows what she's done." My mother gasped, clutching her chest as if I'd just stabbed her. "How can you threaten your own sister like this? She's getting married. She's under so much stress. You're just going to ruin everything." My voice cracked as I shouted, "She already ruined everything. She stole from me, from Dad's memory. And you let her. You stood by and let her do it." The shouting drew attention, because my aunt and uncle, who lived a few streets over, happened to stop by while this was happening. They walked in mid-argument, and my aunt asked, "What's going on here?" That was my chance. I grabbed the papers and thrust them at her. "What's going on? My sister stole $25,000 of my inheritance to fund her damn wedding, and Mom is covering for her." My aunt's eyes widened as she scanned the papers. My uncle frowned deeply, muttering, "That's not right. Not right at all." My mother's face turned pale. She hadn't expected me to expose Jessica like this. Not yet. Not like this. She hissed at me, "How dare you air family business to outsiders?" "Outsiders?" I barked. "They're our family too, and they deserve to know the truth." Word spread faster than I could have imagined. By the following week, cousins were calling me, uncles were texting, all asking if it was true. And I told them yes, every single time, backing it up with the evidence I had collected. Some of them were shocked. Some defended Jessica, saying, "It's just money, Daniel. Don't let it ruin family." But others, especially the older ones who knew how hard Dad had worked, took my side. They said it was disgraceful that Jessica had crossed a sacred line. When Jessica found out I had started telling the family, she called me again, screaming at the top of her lungs. "You're destroying me, Daniel. Do you understand that? This is my wedding, my life. Everyone's looking at me like I'm a thief because of you." I didn't even raise my voice. Calmly, I said, "That's because you are a thief, Jess. The only reason people are looking at you like that is because I showed them the truth. You did this to yourself." Her voice cracked then, a mix of rage and panic. "You're jealous! You've always been jealous! You can't stand that for once! It's about me!" Then she hung up again. But I could hear it, the cracks in her confidence. The mask was slipping, and she knew she couldn't keep hiding behind her perfect wedding fantasy much longer. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I thought about what came next. Jessica still had the money. My mother still refused to take my side. The wedding was still moving forward, as if nothing had happened. But the truth was out now, and there was no going back. I knew I had to take this further. If Jessica wanted to stand in front of hundreds of guests in a white dress, bought with stolen money, then fine. But I was going to make sure that when she walked down that aisle, everyone in that room knew exactly what kind of person she really was. And with that decision, I began planning the next move, exposing her not just within the family, but in front of every single person at her so-called dream wedding. The days leading up to Jessica's wedding were some of the most emotionally draining of my life. Every time my phone buzzed, it was another family member weighing in. Some told me to stop, to let it go, to be the bigger person. Others whispered their support quietly, almost ashamed to admit they agreed with me. But the overwhelming message I got from most was this: "Don't ruin the wedding." That phrase became like nails on a chalkboard in my mind. Don't ruin the wedding, as if my sister hadn't already ruined everything when she drained my $25,000. As if my silence was more important than justice, more important than honoring my father's years of sacrifice. I sat at my kitchen table one night, staring at the bank statement spread in front of me like evidence in a courtroom. I knew I couldn't just shout at the ceremony without proof. People would dismiss me as bitter or jealous. No, I had to make sure the evidence was undeniable. So I organized everything into a neat folder: bank transfers, account screenshots, and even a timeline of the withdrawals. I highlighted each transfer thousands at a time, lining up perfectly with her wedding expenses. The florist deposit, the venue payment, the catering. It was all there. Every dollar traced back to my share of the inheritance. But the question still haunted me. How do I reveal this? Do I stand up during the vows, holding the papers in my hand? Do I corner her in the middle of the reception and force her to admit the truth? Or do I calmly approach family members one by one during the event, showing them the proof until the whispers grow so loud that the fairy tale crumbles on its own? The idea of publicly confronting her made my chest tight, but then I remembered her laughter on the phone when she told me to get over it. That laugh burned into my memory. That was the moment I knew she didn't deserve mercy. The night before the wedding, I visited my father's grave. I hadn't planned to, but I couldn't sleep, and my mind wouldn't stop racing. The cemetery was quiet, the air cool. I crouched down by his headstone, the folder clutched under my arm, and whispered, "Dad, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. All I know is you worked too damn hard for her to treat this money like it was Monopoly cash. I can't let her get away with it. Not this time. Not ever again." My throat tightened, and for the first time since this whole mess started, tears came. I didn't cry much, but that night, I let it out. Because what I was about to do wasn't just about the money, it was about years of being overlooked, about being treated like I didn't matter. This was about finally standing up. The wedding day arrived bright and sunny, the kind of day most people would call perfect. I woke up with a pit in my stomach. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from family. Some were reminders. "Don't cause a scene, Daniel." Others were warnings. "If you embarrass Jessica, she'll never forgive you." And then there were the few brave ones. "Do what you have to do. She needs to be put in her place." I turned off the phone. Today wasn't about their approval. The venue was a large country estate, the kind of place you rent when you want everyone to think you're wealthier than you are. Rows of white chairs lined the aisle, flowers everywhere, a string quartet playing softly in the background. Guests arrived in expensive suits and dresses, smiling, laughing, taking pictures. To them, it was just another fairy tale wedding. To me, it was a crime scene dressed up in roses and tulle. I spotted my mother near the front, fussing with decorations, her face tight with worry. When she saw me, she rushed over, her voice low and urgent. "Daniel, please, I beg you, don't do this today. If you love me at all, you'll let her have this moment." I stared at her, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "You're asking me to bury Dad's memory just so she can play princess for a day. I can't do that, Mom." Her eyes filled with tears. "You'll destroy the family." I shook my head. "No, Mom. Jessica already did." As I walked into the hall, I felt eyes on me. Whispers had already started. People knew something was brewing. I carried the folder with me, like armor, tucked under my arm, ready for the moment. My pulse hammered in my ears, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was walking toward a battlefield. Then I saw Jessica. She stood at the far end of the room, in her gown, surrounded by bridesmaids, glowing with pride. When her eyes met mine, her smile faltered. For a brief second, panic flashed across her face. Then, just as quickly, she straightened, forcing a smile, pretending everything was fine. But I knew. She knew the truth was coming. And in that instant, I decided I wasn't going to whisper. I wasn't going to corner her in private. No, this was going to happen in front of everyone, with no way for her to spin it. Because sometimes the only way to deal with someone who thrives on appearances is to shatter the mask when the spotlight is brightest. So I sat down, folder in hand, waiting for the ceremony to begin, my heart pounding, ready to tear the facade apart. The ceremony began with all the beauty and elegance you would expect from a so-called dream wedding. Guests hushed as the string quartet played. The minister stood ready at the altar. Mark, my sister's fiancé, shifted nervously in his tailored suit, the kind of nervousness that comes not just from getting married, but from wondering if anyone will notice that the suit itself is on credit. People smiled, cameras flashed, and everything was picture perfect on the surface. But beneath that polished surface, my chest was tight with rage and anticipation. My hands gripped the folder so hard the edges cut into my skin. I kept telling myself, "Wait for the right moment, Daniel. Don't rush. Don't stammer. Be calm. Make it undeniable." Then the music shifted. Everyone stood. Jessica appeared at the end of the aisle, glowing in her gown, the very image of a bride. Every eye was on her, every guest smiling, whispering about how beautiful she looked. But all I could see was the thief who stole from me, walking down the aisle with the money our father worked his life for, sewn into every stitch of that dress. As she walked past me, our eyes met, just for a moment. Her smile faltered, just a fraction, and I saw the flicker of fear she tried so hard to hide. My heartbeat thundered. This was it. The minister began the opening words. Mark fumbled through his vows, his voice trembling but loud enough for the audience to hear. Then came Jessica's turn. She smiled radiantly, speaking about love, partnership, and building a future. Every word that left her mouth tasted like poison to me, because that future was funded by betrayal. When the minister asked if anyone objected, the room went silent. Everyone looked around nervously, waiting for that token pause before moving on. And that's when I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound slicing through the silence. Heads turned, gasps rippled across the crowd. I clutched the folder to my chest, my voice steady but loud enough to echo, "I object." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The minister blinked in confusion. Mark's face went pale, and Jessica froze, her smile cracking like glass. "Daniel, sit down," she hissed, her voice sharp but still trying to mask itself with a smile for the audience. But I didn't sit down. I stepped into the aisle, holding up the folder. "This wedding," I said, my voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each word, "is built on theft. Jessica stole $25,000 of my inheritance money our father left me, and used it to pay for all of this." The room erupted. Whispers, gasps, people shifting in their seats. Mark turned toward Jessica, his face twisted in shock. "What is he talking about?" he demanded. Jessica's face flushed red, her hands clenching around her bouquet. "He's lying. He's jealous. He's trying to ruin my day." I shook my head and opened the folder, pulling out the documents. "Lying? These are the bank records. Every withdrawal, every transfer, all traced back to your joint account. The florist, the caterer, the venue. You didn't pay for any of this, Jessica. You paid for it with my share of Dad's legacy." I walked down the aisle slowly, handing the papers to the nearest uncle, who immediately began reading with wide eyes. He passed them along, and soon whispers turned into loud murmurs as people saw the truth for themselves. My aunt gasped audibly, covering her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God, it's true," she whispered. Jessica's mask shattered, her voice cracked as she shrieked, "Why are you doing this to me? You're humiliating me in front of everyone." Tears began to streak down her face, but they weren't tears of guilt, they were tears of being exposed. Mark turned to her, his face pale with anger. "Did you really take his inheritance money?" he asked, his voice sharp. Jessica stammered, I was going to pay him back. I just needed it for the wedding, for us." Mark's jaw clenched. "You stole from your own brother to pay for this?" He pulled his hands away from hers, stepping back as if she were a stranger. The guests were no longer whispering, they were openly talking now. Some glared at Jessica, others shook their heads in disappointment. The perfect fairy tale image had crumbled, and there was no repairing it. I took a deep breath, my voice steady now. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect. About Dad's memory. And you, Jessica, You disrespected both. You could have asked, you could have been honest. Instead, you stole. And now, everyone knows who you really are. Jessica dropped her bouquet, her face crumpling, screaming, "You ruined everything." She tried to lunge at me, but bridesmaids grabbed her arms, holding her back. Mark turned away from her, muttering something under his breath before storming off the stage. The minister cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly at a loss. The ceremony was in shambles, and everyone knew it. Guests began to stand, some leaving, others staying just to watch the chaos unfold. My mother sat in the front row, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. All I felt was a strange, heavy relief. The truth was finally out. No more lies. No more pretending. Jessica's perfect image was shattered in front of the very people she wanted to impress the most. And as I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of her dream day, I knew this was only the beginning. Because if she thought she could steal from me and simply move on with her life, she was wrong. Actions have consequences, and Jessica was just beginning to face hers. The wedding never recovered from my interruption. Once the truth was out, there was no going back. Half the guests left within minutes, muttering about how they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The ones who stayed did so only because they wanted to see the train wreck unravel. The string quartet stopped playing, the minister awkwardly closed his book, and the venue staff stood in the corners whispering to each other. Jessica sat in a chair in her massive white gown, crying into her hands, her makeup running down her face. The picture-perfect bride had vanished, replaced by a woman exposed for what she truly was. Mark disappeared shortly after the confrontation. Later, I learned he had driven away from the venue and checked into a hotel, refusing to answer her calls. It didn't surprise me. Mark was a man obsessed with appearances, and nothing destroys appearances faster than public humiliation tied to financial scandal. He wasn't going to risk starting a marriage under the shadow of stolen money. The engagement was over before the cake was even cut. I walked out of that hall with my head held high, but my chest was heavy. Some people clapped me on the shoulder, quietly telling me I did the right thing. Others glared at me as though I had committed the crime. One cousin even hissed, "You could have handled this privately." But those whispers didn't matter to me anymore. What mattered was that Jessica could no longer pretend. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Family group chats exploded with arguments, half the relatives siding with me, the other half defending Jessica. My mother was livid. She called me screaming, "Do you realize you humiliated your sister on the most important day of her life? You destroyed her future!" My response was calm, almost cold. "No, Mom. She destroyed her own future when she stole from me. I just told the truth." Jessica tried damage control, of course. She posted a long, teary statement on social media, painting herself as a victim. She wrote about how stressful weddings were, how families should support each other, how I was cruel for exposing her at the altar. She conveniently left out the $25,000 she had stolen. But by then, screenshots of the documents had already circulated among relatives and friends. The narrative she tried to build crumbled as quickly as her wedding had. Mark officially called off the engagement a week later. His family, who had attended the ceremony, publicly expressed their disgust. They made it clear they wanted no ties to someone who would steal from her own brother. Jessica was devastated, not just because she lost him, but because she lost the illusion of her perfect life. The fairy tale she had built so carefully had turned into a public scandal, and she had no one to blame but herself. Meanwhile, I focused on myself. I used the experience as fuel to finally move forward with my own plans. I tightened my finances, started making investments, and thought carefully about how to use what little I had left to honor Dad's memory. Every time I logged into my account, the missing $25,000 still stung, but at least now the whole world knew why it was gone. And that truth gave me peace. Family gatherings have never been the same since. There's a divide now, a clear line between those who respect what I did and those who think I went too far. But I've learned to live with that. Because sometimes standing up for yourself means losing people you thought would always be by your side. Sometimes it means being the villain in someone else's story. But in this case, I was not the villain. I was the only one brave enough to call out the thief. Jessica and I barely speak anymore. When we do, it's strained, full of bitterness. She still hasn't repaid me. Deep down, I doubt she ever will. But I don't regret exposing her. Not for 1 second. Because I know, and the family knows, that my father's hard work wasn't completely buried under her lies. The truth was messy, painful, humiliating, but it was also necessary. And so, whenever I think back on that day, standing in the middle of that hall with every pair of eyes on me, I remember the weight of the folder in my hands, the sound of my own voice echoing through the silence, and the way Jessica's mask shattered when she realized she could no longer hide. That was the moment I stopped being the overlooked son and became the man who stood his ground. My sister thought she could steal from me and silence me with guilt. Instead, I made sure her betrayal was seen by everyone. That was my revenge. That was my justice.